Good morning. I am thankful that today, the first Sunday of 2026, here we are together worshiping God in spirit and truth, and I thank you for being here. First of all, as you can see, we have new banners up that shows what our theme is. It's probably a song you may know from camp, or your kids come back from camp singing it, but renew my love, rebuild my faith, restore my soul is the chorus of a song that is often sang at camp, but a thought that is echoed throughout Scripture. So this year we have a new theme. We also have a new design for the slides. Let me go back one slide just basically. They were green on the background. Now they're blue, so thankful to all those who had a hand in getting them looking nice, much better than I could do. So thank you to all who were doing that. This morning what we want to look at is John chapter 13. As I was thinking about this topic, thinking about times, especially in Jesus' life, when there were successes. You know, you think about Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, where Jesus is preaching to the crowds. He has the Sermon on the Mount where people come out, bunch of people, multitudes, the Bible describes it. And here is Jesus speaking and teaching. What a success. Where Jesus is performing miracles and people just flock to him. Or in John chapter 6 where he's feeding the 5,000. What moments of success, but also in Jesus' life, moments where people might say that was a failure. Maybe places like in Matthew 24 where Jesus looks at the city of Jerusalem and says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I would have longed to have gathered you as a hen gathers her chicks, but you were unwilling." Jesus was able to gather them, able to save them, but they were unwilling. And so, in one sense, Jesus did what he came to do, but also a failure for those who did not follow Jesus. And I thought about Jesus' life, moments of success like raising Lazarus from the dead, and those who would believe in Jesus after seeing that miracle. And that shortly thereafter, those who were against Jesus would see the Lazarus living and say, "We've got to put that guy to death. He's too much of a testimony to what Jesus is and represents." Can you imagine putting someone to death who was just raised from the dead? You put him to death, don't you think he has the power to raise him yet again? Doesn't make sense, does it? And so I think about places like John chapter 13, where Jesus had been spending 3.5 years with his disciples, the 12 chosen, who he would send out. He would send out as those who would be apostles to take God's message and reach out to those around them. And in John chapter 13, we have a scenario where Jesus is in this upper room eating the Passover meal with his disciples, and he washes their feet. Maybe in a moment of tenderness, in a moment, I think also, as we're going to see, of felt betrayal, where Judas is going to betray Jesus. And what does Jesus do in a moment where he feels this betrayal, where he feels like he's given everything, and still some don't believe? What do you do when you feel that hurt and you feel that depth of sorrow? You keep on keeping on. And so we're going to learn today and see what Jesus did in John chapter 13 to continue to move himself forward. When he felt like perhaps his love wasn't strong, his faith was being challenged, and his soul was feeling pain. What do we do in moments like that? I want you to think about your life, and this year our theme will be looking at renewing my love, rebuilding my faith, and restoring my soul. Those will be our 3 topics for this year. When we think about renewing our love, it tends to indicate something. If we have to renew something, then something is kind of worn down, right? You have to renew something. You know, your subscription has expired. It's time to renew. You got to renew your car insurance. Something has worn down or come to the end of its life. You have to renew something. And rebuilding your faith, the idea of rebuilding, something needs repair. Your back porch has rotten wood, and so you need to repair that to get it like it was before. So the idea of rebuilding is something might need repairing. And the idea of restoring my soul, something needs to be restored, brought back to how it was originally designed. So these are the topics we're going to be looking at this year, but also starting off the year in today's lesson. I want to ask you, this is a car that is very old. I'll tell you about it in a moment. But I want you to think about your life. Imagine yourself like a car. How many miles do you feel on the car? Think about this car. How does it look? Looks pretty good. Somebody gave it to you free. Would you own it? Probably. I mean, free is good, isn't it? The miles that you feel, the life that you have, is it the car? Is it the mileage? Is it the year, make, and model? What what causes us to feel sometimes that we need to be rebuilt, renewed, restored? What makes us feel that way? This particular car is owned by Irv Gordon, and he is the Guinness World Record holder of the most miles on one vehicle. It's a 1966 Volvo 1800S. How many miles do you think this man has on this car? Over 3.2 million miles. Documented. He has meticulous records. He says the key is maintenance. He has put over 7 engines in that car, which if you calculate it out, that's still like 400,000 miles on each engine. That's pretty good. In this car, he's driven it daily for over 50 years. He has since retired. Volvo reached out and said, we'd like to buy your car and show what our cars can do. But he drove it daily for over 50 years. On average, between 100 and 200,000 miles per year he would put on that car. That's a lot of miles. So is it the car? Is it just that our life is so different from everybody else's that sometimes it's the car? Or is it sometimes the road? Think about this road. If you're driving that road, would you be happy? To me, I look at that road and I say, that's a pretty good road. One thing I noticed when we moved from living overseas to the U.S. is how quiet our roads are. Sure, there might be potholes and we might complain, but I'm telling you, the roads that we still have are far better than roads that I've experienced. In fact, we would come back to the U.S. and I would say, is the car on? It's so quiet. We're driving at 70 miles an hour. Are we really going that fast? It doesn't feel like it. Because at 30 miles an hour, our car would feel like it's going to shake apart. So is it the road that we travel? Some roads are indeed smooth. What about this? I can do maybe 70 miles an hour on the first road. Would you go 70 on that road? Sometimes it's the road that we travel in life, isn't it? Sometimes it's the car that we have. And sometimes it's the age. You might have a car. This car is a 1965 Volvo. They're very proud of the fact that we have the car. We've made the car that has the most mileage, but also the world record holder for the oldest car with the lowest mileage. A dealership had this in their front showroom and literally only moved it a few times in its lifetime. It has 4.5 miles on it. 1965 Volvo. Boy, are they proud of that yet again. Is it the age of the car? That's a 1965 vehicle. Doesn't have many miles on it, does it? Here's another one. This is a Ford F-250. It's been driven twice from the dealership, and the owner said, and then the second time, it was snowing very hard. I had to take my daughter to work. I can't imagine buying a car and just parking it. I don't have that kind of cash laying around. If I buy a car, I need to use it, right? I'm buying it for a purpose. But here are two vehicles, very old in age, but what does the odometer say? Very low miles. If you're anything like me, you might feel, well, I'm still young, but the miles that I have, I feel like I've got millions on the odometer, right? Is it the car? Is it the road? Is it the age? There might be a wide variety of situations that we face, but we face it together, don't we? We face it together, and Sometimes we need restoring, rebuilding, renewing to get back to where we need to be. What I like is that picture, that first Volvo. It looks like an old car that is in really good shape, right? I wouldn't mind owning it. I wouldn't mind driving it. And then you realize how many miles it has. It is truly impressive, isn't it? Because maintenance was done along the way. And that's really what our faith is about. There are things we might have to maintain and give attention to along the way. This truck had been found in this man's barn, just sitting there, and finally he brought it out. Didn't need much restoring, some new tires, some new fluids, and it runs again. Probably won't be driven much. But could you imagine him giving you that truck? Be pretty neat, wouldn't it? When we look at John chapter 13, we see the miles that Jesus has gone in his life. Very short life. Jesus started his ministry at about 30 years of age, being baptized by John the Baptist. And at about 33, Jesus went to the cross and died. But for these 3.5 years, he's spending this time with his apostles, men whom he trusted. And what Jesus focused on is teaching them and training them and living with them, and yet felt betrayal by what Judas did to him. You know, in Jesus in his life, he felt that trust was indeed broken, especially with Judas. Matthew chapter 26, in verse 17 through 19, the disciples are out. They're preparing this Passover meal in an upper room, and Jesus is there with them. And they are eating of this meal, and he sets aside part of the meal, which we know was unleavened bread and fruit of the vine. He sets aside that part of the meal to do something with it later. After they had began eating the meal, he paused and he washed his disciples' feet. And it was at that time where Judas leaves to betray Jesus. Matthew chapter 26, we see Judas going out and he's looking for that opportunity to betray Jesus. We see that in John chapter 13 and verse 30. John 13 and verse 30. It says, having received the piece of bread, he went out immediately, and it was night. This is talking about Judas looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. Goes out, betrays Jesus, finds that opportunity. And how do you think Jesus felt about that? Maybe he was feeling the miles. Maybe he was feeling the road that he had traveled and the road that yet laid ahead. And those men whom he had worked with that should help him move down that road, and yet one was betraying him. So Jesus is eating this meal, setting apart some of it to talk about the Lord's Supper and why it will be important for his disciples, his followers, that would come later to do that in a way to remember him. And that's what we do today. Probably Judas had left before Jesus instituted that. But the trouble in the room, in that upper room, was palpable. You could feel something was not right. Look at John 13 and verse 21. When Jesus had said these things, he was troubled in spirit and testified and said, most assuredly I say to you, one of you will betray me. Jesus was troubled in this moment of washing his disciples' feet. There was trouble in the room. There was trouble in the air. You could hear it in his words. You could probably see it on his face. Jesus was troubled, which by extension caused his disciples to be troubled. If something troubles someone you care about, it troubles you also, doesn't it? Look at verse 22. Then the disciples looked at one another, perplexed about whom he spoke. Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of the disciples whom Jesus loved. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask who it was of whom he spoke. Then leaning back on Jesus' breast, he said to him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it. And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. The disciples were troubled at the way Jesus felt. And when he felt like this, being betrayed by those he had worked so closely with, no doubt Jesus felt like he needed to be renewed, brought back to where he was, brought back to a better situation. and relationship. There was darkness in that upper room. Verse 27 says, "Now after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Then Jesus said to him, 'What you do, do quickly.'" If we fast forward to John chapter 18 and verse 3, "Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, 'Whom are you seeking?' They answered him, 'Jesus of Nazareth.' Jesus said to him, 'I am he.' And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them." As we think about these situations, what is unfolding in this upper room? Jesus is feeling betrayed by Judas, by one whom he loved, one whom he had chosen, worked with for 3.5 years. And we see Judas willing to give himself over to Satan's use. Satan will love to use anyone who is willing. Judas was willing, and Satan was willing to use him, and he did. So we see the scenario and the situation in this upper room. We see darkness, but ultimately darkness is defeated by love. Jesus, knowing all of this would happen, what do we see Jesus doing? Well, we see Jesus in this upper room washing his disciples' feet. Verse 1 of chapter 13. "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." When you're worn down and you're feeling the mileage on the odometer, and you're feeling you need to be renewed, that the time is tough, the situation is difficult, what do? You focus on love, and that's what Jesus did. Love will help build him up, lift him up, and keep him moving toward the cross. The end of verse 1, he loved them to the end. If we look at verse 5, "After that he poured water into a basin and began washing the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded." Why would Jesus do something that some might look at as humiliating? Some might look at as beneath him. He is the rabbi, the teacher, and yet he is washing their feet. Jesus is trying to renew himself and those he is with love. Look at verse 34 and verse 35 of John 13. "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." What will renew you when you feel worn down, beaten down, like there's so many miles, the road is long, the age is creeping up? What renews you in that scenario? I would suggest it is love. If we look at what renewed Jesus, it was love. Love for all people of the world, which is why he continued to go to the cross and die upon it. Another thing that Jesus focused on in being renewed was not only love, but he focused on rebuilding. He focused on rebuilding. One thing that Jesus did not do was give up on people. Look at verse 6 through 11. Verse 6, "Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, 'Lord, are you washing my feet?' Jesus answered and said to him, 'What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this.' Peter said to him, 'You shall never wash my feet.' Jesus answered him, 'If I do not wash you, you have no part with me.' Simon Peter said to him, 'Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head.' Jesus said to him, 'He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you.'" We look at verse 11, "For he knew who would betray him, therefore he said, 'You are not all clean.'" My point is, in this, Jesus came to Peter, and Peter at first said, "You're not going to wash my feet." And Jesus drew the line, the proverbial line in the sand. "If I don't wash you, you have no part with me." Peter said, "Then wash all of me." Jesus wasn't trying to give him a bath. He was trying to teach him a lesson about love And about service, Jesus did not give up on people. Look at Peter. Sometimes he would really put his foot in his mouth, wouldn't he? He would say, well, don't wash my feet. And then, okay, wash all of me. Peter, you're going too far on both extremes. But Jesus did not give up on people. And what Jesus did was rebuild faith with service. In verse 12 through 17, we see Jesus showing the meaning behind washing the disciples' feet. Look at verse 12. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. What Jesus is trying to show here is, you recognize me as your teacher, therefore I want to teach you something. Jesus truly is our teacher, and we have to listen to what he's trying to teach us. He says also in verse 13, you recognize me as Lord, the one in authority, the one in control. Now listen to what I'm trying to teach you. What he's trying to teach them is we have an obligation towards other people. Jesus did not give up on Peter very quickly. In verse 14, we see here, if I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. Jesus is showing we have an obligation to those around us to consider their faith, and if it needs to be rebuilt, to help in that process. What Jesus is not showing is an example of foot washing. From this point on, we have no record in the New Testament that anybody ever repeated foot washing. It's not washing of the feet that it was important. It was the lesson of service and sacrifice and humility. You ought to wash each other's feet. You ought to love your brother and sister in Christ. That's what Jesus is trying to show. An example of love and service. When our faith gets beat down, what do? Do we give up? We go home? We say it just didn't work out. There's too many miles on the engine. The road is too rough. I quit. Or do we get back to work serving like we should? Verse 16, Jesus is trying to teach an example of humility. Most assuredly, he says in verse 16, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If Jesus was willing to be humble and serve, then we ought to be humble and serve. We are not greater than Jesus. If he was willing to do it, we ought to be willing to do it. Jesus rebuilt faith. He rebuilt the relationship with his disciples, with himself and what he was struggling with Judas's betrayal. He focused on serving. He rebuilt by taking what he knew he needed to do and turning it into doing. That's the challenge for us, isn't it? Look at verse 17. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. It's easy to know what we need to do. We know we need to get to the gym and exercise. Here we are in a new year, and it doesn't even take until February where people quit their New Year's resolutions. We know what we need to do, but it's hard to do it, isn't it? We know we need to love and serve, but it's hard. And Jesus challenges us to rebuild our faith by making sure we couple knowing with doing. Third, what we want to look at here is how did Jesus build himself back up? When he felt betrayal, he felt perhaps abandoned in this upper room. He focuses on washing the disciples' feet. He focuses on restoring the situation to this scenario. Verses 1 through 4, it truly is easy to focus on distractions. Verse 1 to 4, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come and that he should depart from this world to the Father, Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended, the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel, and girded himself. Look at all the distractions that are mentioned in verses 1 through 4. Jesus knew the cross was coming. He knew he had come from God and he would return to God. He knew he would be betrayed by Judas. It's so easy to focus on the distractions and let that rule your life. But Jesus says in order to get back to doing what we should be doing, to restore where we ought to be, we cannot focus on distractions. There was a departure at hand. He was going to return to the Father in verse 1. There was the distraction of the meal, the Passover meal. There's so much going on in this upper room. There's a distraction of the betrayal that Judas would be there to deliver to Jesus, how it would break his heart. And in verse 3, the return of after his death on the cross, going back, ascending to heaven, to where he had come. And so there's so many distractions that's easy to focus on all the things happening around us, but we have to remember why we are here. We have to remember on being restored to God. Look at verse 8. Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "If I do not wash you, you have no part with me." Verse 10, Jesus said, "He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you." Jesus is focusing on being restored to God. Peter was saying, well, then don't even just wash my feet, wash all of me. And he's saying, let's just take care of what needs to be taken care of. You don't need me to wash your whole body. It's not dirty. Let's just address the problem at hand. What the problem at hand is for us is making sure we are restored with God, that we are washed, as Jesus says. You know, one thing we need to do is be washed in the blood of the Lamb. Revelation chapter 7 and verse 14 talks about those who receive the crown of life, those who are in heaven with God. They have washed themselves in the blood of the Lamb. You know, blood is something, if I get blood on my shirt, I say, Cindy, I'm in trouble. My nose bled and I need your help. This blood does not come out, and it sure didn't make my shirt white. A white shirt shows red blood. But the picture in Revelation chapter 7 is we wash ourselves in the blood of the Lamb and then become white as snow. It is the blood that makes everything clean. The blood of Jesus makes us clean. John chapter 3, verses 3 through 5 show if we are not washed, if we are not changed, if we are not born again into a relationship with Jesus, we have no hope. So when we need restoring, we need to focus on doing it God's way. As we wrap this up, I want to ask you, what's wearing you down today? Is it the miles you've got on the odometer? You've seen a lot, you've been through a lot, the miles you've traveled are long and many. Or is it the road that you've traveled? Maybe you're not so old, you're not so young either, but maybe the road that you've gone down has been very rough and taken its toll. Maybe it's the age. Maybe the road hasn't been too bad, but maybe it's the age. You're now being challenged with things you haven't been challenged with before. I can relate to this. I think this is me. This guy says, I love preaching. I'm only 20. This feels like me some days. I feel like I'm 100, but I look in the mirror and it's slowly getting to be that. And so what's the road that you're traveling right now? Do you need renewal, rebuilding, restoring? What do you need that God is willing and able to help you with? Jesus, in the most challenging time in his life, right before the cross, in this upper room, facing betrayal, focused on rebuilding, renewing, and restoring. If you are like a car, what shape are you in today? Is there a way we can pray with you or for you? Do you need to be baptized into Christ to begin that journey anew? Make sure you are right with God. If there's encouragement that you need, the miles have been many, the road has been rough, the age is piling up, and you need encouragement, we want to pray with you and for you. Let us know how we can serve you as we stand and sing.